for Kaplan. Ever since I took my own MCAT, which was back in 2006, I started teaching in 2007. And while the MCAT has undergone a couple of changes since then, it is still essentially very much the same test. And what we want to talk about today is how to build a successful study plan, because this is something that, unlike most tests that you probably have experience with, you're going to need to study for the MCAT a little bit differently. That's because the test is different than other tests that you've encountered in the past. Undergrad tests, you can do very well cramming for them, and I'm sure you've all got some experience doing that. If you count grad school, I was in college for 10 years. I know all about cramming for tests and how cramming for undergrad exams and grad school exams and everything, which test you on a very narrow subject, but you have to know it pretty extensively. Cramming works really, really well. But then, of course, you start to forget that material very, very quickly when you cram. So on the MCAT, they have to study for this differently because it's a different test. If you're not being tested on a very narrow set of subjects very deeply, it's a very superficial test. But it is pretty comprehensive in terms of all the different topics that you can be asked about or will be asked about. So we need to study for this test a little bit differently. Even if you have done very well on tests and even standardized tests in the past, the MCAT's just a completely different animal. Here we've got a couple of links and everything that you can use to, first off, get a percentage, 15% off of any eligible Kaplan courses. You can see that you can book a meeting there, that youcanbook.me link with somebody who's familiar with your school as well as all the Kaplan programs. And of course, we can see down at the bottom, you can win a summer travel bundle, which would, of course, be very useful, maybe as a post-MCAT celebration, maybe to help with interviews, something along those lines. Getting a question in here about the timeline. We definitely have a timeline slide coming up in just a little bit about when to study and when you want to be ready, when you want to apply and stuff like that. So we will be talking about things like that. And we also have the possibility of joining us as a Kaplan employee, as a student brand ambassador, which provides a couple of benefits that you see here on the screen, as well as, of course, pay, right? When you work, you should get paid for it. So for people who are possibly interested in doing some work and getting a free Kaplan course and all those other things that come along with it, you can learn a little bit more and apply at that link at this particular QR code that we see here. If you have any questions about that, of course, you can ask me any questions. In fact, this is very informal. If you just use the chat, you can ask me any questions as we go along, and either I'll get to them or I'll talk about them, or I'll say, we're about to talk about that in 2 minutes, the next slide or whatever. Which is what I said when somebody asked about the med school admissions timeline, which, of course, we've got coming up right here. So this is typically the year before you want to go to medical school. So for people who want to start at medical school in fall 2025, this is the 2024 calendar, where you're going to want to take the MCAT by early summer, by late spring at the latest, really. Get those primary applications in as soon as possible. Complete the secondary applications within a couple weeks of getting them. And so you can see sort of the recommended ideal timeline, as well as it's possible to apply to medical school in October. You're just not going to be getting in. So ideally, you definitely want to make sure that you are on the ideal timeline, if that is at all possible. So for most people, that would be taking the MCAT I'd say by the end of April. This goes to the end of May here. But I would say end of April is your ideal, because that way you'll have your scores in hand for the opening of the primary application process, which typically happens around June 1st. It takes a month to get your scores back. So if you want to have your score in hand on day one, which is the ideal situation for applying, then you'll want to have taken the MCAT by the end of April. Now, if you're planning on taking the MCAT this year, and you're planning on a May or June date or something like that, that's not the end of the world. You can definitely apply at those, or on that sort of a timeline, give yourself a good chance of admission into medical school. It's better to wait a little bit and get a higher score than it would be to apply on day one, but maybe not have the kind of score that the schools you're applying to are looking to see. But most school or most med students are not coming directly from a 4-year undergrad program. If you plan on taking a gap year or more than a gap year, or you're already in a gap year or something along those lines, then of course you would just move this up a year or two or whatever. But you want to be taking the MCAT by the spring of the year before, so a year and a half before you want to go to or want to start medical school. It's a process that takes a while. So if you're applying for 2025, you should be taking the MCAT now. So sometime within the next 2 or 3 months or so is the ideal situation. Of course, everybody's situation is different, but if you are freshman, sophomore, or you're a junior planning on taking a gap year or something like that, this is important information for you to know for next year. But for anybody who wants to go and start medical school in July or August of 2025, should be almost ready to take the MCAT now and get that score and start that application process on that ideal kind of timeline. Of course, if you've got a really good application, you might be able to afford applying a little bit later, but the earlier the better, really. It's a rolling admissions process, and there's no benefit to taking the MCAT and then and applying before you get your score or anything like that, because nobody's going to look at your application until it's complete, which includes an official MCAT score. So you should plan on applying, or you should plan on taking the test so that 1 month after your test, when you get your scores, then you'll be able to apply. So if you can get that score in hand before the end of May, you'll be all set to go to apply on day one, again, which is the ideal if it's possible. A lot of people will be getting into medical school not applying on day one, but your chances are, of course, going to be better the earlier you apply within that timeline. But if you are interested in this timeline at all, this would be a great time for you to take a quick little screenshot so you can sort of plan, as we see here, 1 year before the desired start date, which of course would be your desired start of medical school. So all this stuff has to happen more than a year before you plan on going to med school. Now, the point of today's session here is to make sure that you have have the ability and the knowledge to build a successful study plan. This is something that does require a plan. You can't really just wing it. A lot of people do try and they think, oh, you know what? I know how to answer multiple choice questions. I've got my strategies that have always worked for me. Just got to brush up a little bit on the content and then I'll be fine. And that's an attitude that has led to a lot of people not reaching the score that they need to get on this test. You need to have a plan and you need to do things differently. I consider it the hardest part of my job to convince all of my students that they need to change their habits. The reason that that's hard is that all of you have a lot of evidence in your past that your way works. You've done well on tests, studying your way, answering questions your way. So I always get a lot of resistance from students who don't want to adopt the strategies that we teach in the course. But for anybody who is interested in enrolling in a Kaplan course, what you're really paying for are the strategies. Much, much, much more important than any content. The course does go over content. There's plenty of opportunity to get that material, to learn all of that and everything. But what we focus on mainly is the strategy of getting the questions right, because really the MCAT is a test that's full of easy questions. But they take all those easy questions and they've got their little tricks and traps of making them all a little bit harder or a lot harder. And our strategies are specifically designed to circumvent their strategies so that you can turn that harder version of the question back into the easy version. And if you, over the course of 230 questions, if you can make each of them at least a little bit easier, some of them a lot easier, you're going to get more questions right. And that's what all of this is about, getting more questions right, because that's literally what you're scored on, the number of correct responses. Not it isn't the case that some questions are worth more than others in a section, that you'd rather get a harder question than an easy one. They're all worth exactly the same. So you're trying to maximize the number of points you get in each section. In order to do that, you do need to have a plan if you want to reach your true potential here. First off, you need to plan your timeline. And I think that's why that slide a couple of minutes ago was important for many of you. And this is going to be different for everybody. But the amount of time that you spend studying, of course, has to be enough to do well. But you want to be focusing it on doing the right things. Because the two biggest mistakes that people make is either A, not putting in the time, or B, putting in the time but spending it unwisely and doing things that aren't helpful to their score or not the most helpful things for their score. Now, the AAMC does survey the people who take the MCAT, and they report that on average, 20 hours a week for 3 months. So if we just say that it's 4 weeks in a month, we're talking about approximately 240 hours there, but we're going to recommend for most people 300 to 350 hours, which is more than the average for a couple of reasons. It's more than the average on purpose. First off, we know that that average is brought down by some people who are just winging it, people who are just not studying at all, or at least reporting that they didn't study. I think sometimes people like to say, oh, I didn't study for this, even if they put hundreds of hours into it, because it makes them feel, I don't know, that something that's hard for other people wasn't so hard for them, even though they did have to struggle with it. Of course, you do want to be above average as well. So an average score on the MCAT is about a 500, maybe a little bit higher, but 500 for most people isn't the score that they're aiming for. Most people will be aiming for a 510, 515, depending on what school you want to go to. You may be aiming for that 520 plus score. So if you want to figure out how much time it takes or it will take you, you could take that 300 hours as sort of a rough estimate for people who have recently taken all of the classes, done well, and still retain most of that knowledge, or at least a good amount of that knowledge that we can build on. 300 hours is a reasonable goal. If it's been a while since you've taken physics, or if you haven't yet taken organic chemistry or something like that, of course, that 300 hours is not going to be enough. Some people are going to take 400 hours. It might take 500 hours, but it's an investment of time that's definitely worth it if it can translate into higher MCAT scores. So, of course, if you know when you're going to test, you can take that timeline and say, okay, in order to get up to 300 or 350 or 400 hours or whatever, you would need to study about 25 hours per week. Another way you could look at this is say, maybe I've got 20 hours a week, or I have 25 hours in my typical week, and I can use that to figure out when I would want to test. And of course, you could take your 25 hours a week, and then 25 divided by 300 gets you 12. Okay, I'd be ready in 12 weeks. So depending on what knowledge you currently have, you can go from there. If you know how much time you have per week, you can figure out how many weeks. Or if you know how many weeks until test day, you can use that to figure out how many hours per week you need to study. And of course, that 300, that should be a bare minimum that everybody aims for. But some people are going to take longer, and it's not a measure of how smart you are or anything like that. It just, some people are going to take a little bit more practice, a little bit more time to learn the new methods. And I think sometimes it is the people who have had more success in their studies, people who have done things their own way and done very well doing them. Those are the people who sometimes end up taking a little bit more time than average to get ready, because they do need to break down their way of doing things and build up a new strategy, which does take some time. And the strategies we teach in class are going to slow you down and make you worse at the MCAT in the meantime. The analogy I like to use is like learning how to type. When we were growing up around computers and learning how to type and everything, we all probably got pretty good staring at that keyboard, hitting it with 2 fingers or 4 fingers, probably got pretty fast at typing that way. And when you have to learn how to type for real after knowing how to type like that, it's so frustrating, because you just know if I could just look at the keyboard and do things my own way, I could just be so much better and faster and more accurate. And that's true in the meantime. But it's the people who forget that old way, learn the new way of typing, and practice it, explicitly thinking about every letter that they're typing in at first. It's those people who get to the point where, of course, typing for real, they're much faster and much more accurate than they ever could have been doing things their own way. So the strategies, if you are to take the Kaplan class and everything, strategies will make you worse at first, but if you stick with them, they are definitely going to be worth it. In fact, the strategies, I would say that the MCAT is probably about 25 to 30% what you know, and 70% what you can do with it. How can you think about it? Can you use it to solve problems? Can you use physics to answer a biology question, for instance? That's the sort of connected thinking, critical thinking that the MCAT's really testing your abilities for. We know that doctors don't know all of the medicine, but they know the basics really well. They know where to get more information. They know how to think about those basics, and they're good judges of what's critical in a particular situation. Big part of critical thinking is thinking about the critical part. And that's a lot of what the MCAT is testing on. They're going to give you extra information. They're going to give you things that you don't need to think about in order to select that answer choice. So for what's on the MCAT, there's stuff that's required for medical school, but then there's stuff like biochem, psychology, and sociology that aren't really required courses for you to take. You don't need them on your transcript, but you need to have that knowledge if you want to do well on the MCAT. So MCAT required, but not really med school required. You need the knowledge, don't necessarily need to have taken that class. But of course, it definitely helps if you have taken the class. Now, no matter what class we're talking about, whether it's a pre-med prereq or not, you don't have to have taken all of these classes. You can learn physics too if you haven't yet taken that. You can learn organic chemistry for the MCAT if you haven't yet taken that. It just means that it's probably going to take you a little bit longer. You're going to need to work a little bit harder than other people who may have already taken those courses. So if we take a look at the 3 different science sections on the test, we have a rough estimate of a breakdown for what each section is composed of. And we can see, of course, biology and biochemistry is going to be the majority of the biological and biochemical foundations section. But we can see that there's still going to be a bunch of biochemistry, maybe even a little biology in the chem phys section. That psychology and sociology section, we can see psychology is a nice, huge chunk of that. But we also see a bunch of sociology, a little biology sneaks in there as well. So we can see that, physics on its own, physics and organic chemistry only are going to be about 10%, maybe a little bit less of the test each, but there's still going to be significant factors significant factors for your score. So we can see here which things are going to be more important, but of course, all of these subject areas are going to be pretty important for your studies, but it can help you to prioritize what you want to learn first. Now, when you are trying to figure out what to study, a lot of times people have this idea that they're going to get all the content down and then transition to practice later on in their preparation, which is a horrible idea. That's not the way that our brains work. That's not the way we learn. That's not what's going to work on the MCAT. In fact, we have our students start by taking a practice test that they know they're going to do poorly on. They're going to get a score that is not something that would be acceptable to them on test day, but it doesn't matter because it isn't yet test day. As you can tell, we sent a teacher here. I'm a teacher. I'm not here to be a salesman. I'm not trying to sell you the course or anything like that. But you can use if you are planning on studying maybe on your own or with some other company or whatever, there's still some stuff that we'd like you to keep in mind in order to make sure that your study plan is the right one for you. First off, you want to make sure that you are putting things in the right order. Now, the Kaplan program kind of takes a lot of the guesswork out of what to do and when to do it, what to do first, what to do after that, because you want to make sure that you're building up the knowledge. It's not that there's all these different topics on the test and they're all equally weighted, even if that is the case, which we already saw that it isn't. But even if that were the case, it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter where you start. You want to start at the more foundational things and then build up from there, sort of a scaffolding. Because if you don't understand something like classical physics there, you don't understand things like forces and acceleration and mass and how these things are all related to each other, then you're not going to understand electrostatics, which is all of that, plus some extra stuff layered on top of it. So of course, you're going to want to see certain subjects before other subjects that you're building up. Even though you have seen most of this material before, starting over, you do want to kind of go in that order where you're starting with the most foundational stuff and building on it from there. So our classes, again, go in an order that makes sense, where you're going to go over things like classical physics before electrostatics. You're going to go over things like solution chemistry before you get to electrochemistry, because electrochemistry is solution chemistry plus some extra stuff layered on top of it. So you want to keep in mind that you want to have a logical order to the material that you're covering. And you're not just, let's say, getting a bunch of books and then starting with physics and reading through all the physics, or starting with Gen Chem and just reading through all of that and then moving on. You don't want to do that. You want to be doing things all mixed up. You want to be doing, in fact, our entire program is built off of two main learning science concepts. One of them is called interleaving, which means that you are not just doing all of physics, then all of Gen Chem, and so on. Because if you do that, by the time you get back to physics, you're going to have forgotten it all. You want to mix it all up. You want to jumble it. As we can see here, I've color-coded all these different topics. We see that the green is the physics, and the orange is chemistry, and the purple is psychology, and the blue is biology or biochemistry. And you can see here that this prescribed order, everything's all mixed up. That's going to allow you to make different connections. It's going to allow you to understand everything a little bit better because it's going to lead to confusion. And when you are confused between two topics, let's say in chemistry, both rate laws and equilibrium constants involve the concentration of the reactants and a constant K. But that K constant is different and means different things in those two different contexts. So if you're confused about those two different Ks, those two different ways of using the concentration of reactants in chemistry, if you get confused on that and you realize that you're confused and then you learn each of those topics better to resolve that confusion, that's how you're going to end up learning. That's how you're going to end up avoiding a lot of the mistakes that many people make when they study for the test, the mistakes many people make as they're actually taking the test. So the other learning science concept that we've built the program around is something known as spaced repetition. When we study something, what we want to happen is we want to look at it once, retain that information forever, never forget it, and you're good. You just read it once and you're fine. We want this to happen. But that's not realistic. This is how we study when we cram. We study, we try to keep it all in our heads, we then go take the test, and then over the course of the next couple of days, that information is going to start to fade away. So when you study, it's not that you study it and you've got it in your head, it's trapped there forever and you're never going to forget it. You see something a little bit more like this. You get it all, and then that is going to quickly decay over time. So seeing something once is not the way to learn it. If you were to take your last undergrad exam, and let's say you showed up to that exam and your professor said, surprise, the test is actually 24 hours from now, but you're all going to be locked in this room, unable to study for the next 24 hours. Over the course of that 24 hours, a lot of the information, let's say it's a test that you got an A on. If you took that test a day later, you probably wouldn't still be getting an A on it because a lot of that material is going to rapidly decay. On the MCAT, if you learn something and then it rapidly decays, that's not going to help you very much. You need to have it in your head months from now on test day. So we do something called spaced repetition, where you get the basics your first time through, and some of that's going to start to fade away, but that's fine because you're going to see it again a second time. And then, of course, that material is going to start to fade away again, but you can see that you've retained a little bit more than you had the first time. And then you're going to see it again, and it's going to start to decay. But this right here is called the forgetting curve. You learn something, and then you forget it. But then you learn it again, and you forget it, and then you learn it again. And every time you learn it, you lose a little bit less than you lost the last time. So we join up the bottoms of all of these curves here, or the bottom of each of those, like on this study day. We can connect them all together and actually generate something known as a learning curve, which is probably a concept that many of you have heard of before. A learning curve shows over time how much of that material you've retained, and this is what you actually are learning. If you count that 100% all the way up at the top, that's what you know right now, but as we've seen, it's going to quickly fade away. So all of our students see all of the material at least 3 times. The higher yield material, they're going to see a lot more than 3 times. But we have a set of assignments called content refreshers. After that comes all of the same material, but packaged in different ways, tested in different ways for something called the application assignments. And after that, it's all just practice tests. And you're going to be encountering a lot of those concepts on practice tests. And when you get stuff wrong, you're going to go back and learn it again. If you're getting it right, great, you already know it well enough. If you're getting it wrong because you don't know the science, then you go back and you learn the science. You brush up on that a little bit. So spaced repetition and interleaving, 2 things that I want you to consider to be part of your MCAT program. Whether or not you decide to prep with Kaplan, those are 2 things that really need to be part of everybody's MCAT study program, study plan. So again, we've got a couple of different passes through. We prioritize what's highest yield because what we really care about is getting questions right on test day. You don't need to be able to get a PhD in organic chemistry by the time you take the MCAT. You need to be able to answer multiple choice MCAT questions on organic chemistry by the time you get to test day. So like I said, the Kaplan program has kind of taken a lot of the guesswork out of what to do next. And one of the tools that we have for that is actually a calendar. When our students first sign up, they log in once they get their login information and they see a calendar. And they enter in 2 pieces of information, which can be changed at a later date. But the 2 pieces of information they enter in are what we already talked about in the very first step here of the plan. And that is how many hours per week you have to study and when your anticipated test date is. So how many weeks you have to study. Hours per week and weeks until test day come together to give us an overall number of hours. So if you say that you're going to test in 20 weeks and you have 20 hours a week, that's 400 total hours. What the calendar does is it shows you what the 400 most important hours for you to do are. And that's going to be different for everybody. For instance, if my weakness is in psychology, but your weakness is in chemistry, there's different things that we should be focusing on. There isn't any like one size fits all approach to doing this. And the calendar helps to kind of customize it while keeping the guesswork out of like what's highest yield, what should you do next. It basically tells you what it is that you want to do. So we want to make sure that everybody's spending their time wisely because you have to put in the time, but you also need to spend that time doing the right things. Now we can see on this schedule here that there are live classes. And we have a question coming through about those live classes. Now, those live classes would, the times and days are on different schedules. So when you sign up for a course, you can select one that will meet at times and days when you are available or when you're generally available. There are ways to make it up if you have to miss a session or something like that. We also have for people who are busy or who can't be reliably able to attend their sessions. We do have self-paced options, which is all the same material just recorded, so you can watch it at 3 in the morning if you really wanted to. So we have a bunch of different options because we know that people have different lives. So some people would like the structure of a live class where they have a teacher, keeping them kind of accountable. And that can be with a live online class, or as we'll see later, we do have some in-person classes in your area coming up. But we do have a number of different options for people who will be able to meet every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern or something along those lines. We have options for people who wouldn't be. We have options that run in the mornings, especially things like over the summer. We'll have various times of day when these class sessions start. But this calendar pretty much takes the guesswork out of what to do next. And I think that it helps to streamline a lot of people's prep because they're not wasting time doing things that they don't need to do. And everything's prioritized by what's most important and also what's most important for you. In fact, these quizzes and the different modules that you see on those different days, those contain placement quizzes. If you're getting the questions right, you don't need to spend a lot of time on that. So you would test out of some things. If you're doing not as well on those placement quizzes, then it will direct you to spend your time maybe reading a chapter in the book or attending what we call our workshop sessions, which are held live sessions every day that aren't part of the class schedule itself. But there are a lot of different options that we'll see in just a little bit. Oh, and it looks like you have a 5-week summer MCAT test program that you can incorporate into your study program as well. But I mentioned before, you have to put in enough time and spend that time doing the right things. Kaplan students have access to a huge wealth of resources. In fact, if you were to do everything on the MCAT site, it would take you about 2,000 hours. 2,000 hours is a full-time job, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, 50 weeks of the year. It's a full-time job for a year, right? 40 hours a week for 50 weeks. Nobody needs to study for 2,000 hours in order to do well on the MCAT. But out of those 2,000 hours, what are the things that you need to do? That's where you're going to, or that's where Kaplan students will be allowed to sort of focus their energies on the things that they actually need to do. Not the stuff that they're getting right, not the stuff that's low yield, but sort of the intersection of the Venn diagram where one circle is the stuff you're getting wrong and another circle is the stuff that appears on the test most often. So all of our students have access to the content refreshers that we talked about, those application assignments that we talked about, and 16 full-length tests. Everything the AAMC publishes, our students have access to. Plus, there's 11 Kaplan full-length tests as well. And depending on how much time you have until test day, some people will end up taking 15 or 16 full-length practice tests. But it's not about how many you take. It's about taking enough, but also taking them the right way and reviewing them the right way. Now, that calendar, as well as things like the placement quizzes, are going to allow you to skip what you already know and prioritize your time on the things that you actually do need to work on, the stuff you're getting wrong, the stuff that appears on the test pretty frequently. So like I said before, if there's a placement quiz, if you ace the quiz, you skip that unit. And you prioritize your time, you invest your time in places where you're going to get more bang for your study buck. So this is the fastest way to build up an increase in your score. Now, when we take practice tests, I always tell my students, those first 5 or 6 practice tests, the score doesn't matter. We use these practice tests not as gauges of progress, but as simply just opportunities to make a lot of mistakes. You can't study for the MCAT properly by avoiding making mistakes. You need to make the mistakes so you know what to work on. There's way too much stuff for us to try to do everything. So we're going to make mistakes and then focus on those areas, focus on the reasons why you made those mistakes, and work at that actual underlying cause. I consider getting a question wrong not to be a problem, but a symptom. It's a symptom of some underlying cause, something wrong with your thinking, something wrong with your strategy, something missing from your content knowledge. There's some reason why you didn't get that question right. There might be more than one reason why you didn't get that question right. And addressing those specific reasons why you're getting questions wrong, that's how you're going to pull your score up the fastest and easiest way. So once you've done all those assignments, if you're a Kaplan student, you'll enter what we call the prep cycle, which is kind of what it sounds like. It's just taking a test, reviewing it, learning from that review, taking another test, reviewing it, learning from that review, and doing that over and over and over. You don't want to take more than 1 practice test a week. Some people want to save all their practice tests for the end and then take 3 or 4 a week in the last 2 weeks leading up to test day, where you're not getting the benefit out of taking practice tests if you do something like that. You want to start your practice early and often. You want to get a lot of stuff wrong so you know where to focus your studies. Believe me, I've been doing this for a very long time. Nobody's gotten more MCAT questions wrong than I have. Nobody's made more MCAT mistakes than I have, except maybe for a couple of my colleagues who have been doing this for just as long, maybe even longer in some cases. So you can't be afraid of making mistakes. You don't want to over or front load your studies and then try to take practice tests and get perfect scores on them. What you want to do is take practice tests early, get horrible scores on them, and use that to point you towards the things that you actually need to work on. So you take a practice test, a Kaplan test, an AAMC test, whatever, a full-length practice simulation. Then you review those results. And we have a couple of things that we have all of our students do in order to review their tests. And one of them is just keep track of all the questions that they get wrong on a spreadsheet. We call it the How I'll Fix It sheet. So it's sort of a spreadsheet where you diagnose what's wrong and then come up with a plan to treat it. Think about it this way. If you, a couple of years from now, when you're a doctor, patient comes to you with a headache, that headache isn't a problem, it's a symptom. You have to figure out what's causing the headache if you want to figure out how to treat it. If that headache is caused by a brain tumor, that's a very different treatment plan than if the headache is caused by dehydration, or if somebody's got the wrong eyeglass prescription, or somebody didn't get enough sleep last night, or somebody drank a little too much alcohol last night. All these different things can cause headaches. They've all got very different treatments for them. Getting a question wrong, I could give all of you the same question, and you could all pick the same wrong answer choice, and everybody could do it for their own reasons, for different reasons than everybody else. Getting it wrong isn't the problem. Something led you to get it wrong. That's the problem. You identify that problem, you work to eliminate that problem, and the score goes up. So you review that test basically to diagnose what your issues are and come up with a treatment plan for fixing them. Then you follow that treatment plan. You use those results. You target your areas of opportunity. Because again, the test is way too broad. You can't study everything in depth, and you don't want to because that would be a huge waste of time. You know some of this stuff already. You don't want to be focusing your time, you don't want to be focusing your attention on the stuff that you know well enough already. It is a multiple choice test. You only need to know it well enough to select the right answer choice. So you figure out what the problems are, you come up with a treatment plan for fixing those problems, you follow that treatment plan, you work on some related topics and everything. Then you take a day off and you take another practice test and you start this over again. And our practice, the practice tests that we have for Kaplan are extremely realistic. We have an entire test likeness team that goes over every question. Every question on our test is modeled after one of the questions from the AAMC's resources that they release. And we make sure that our exams are very realistic. Now, you can find a whole lot of rumors where people are trying to compare things like compare the AAMC test to the Kaplan test and say, oh, these ones are harder or those ones are easier or whatever. And those people don't know what they're talking about. But the only difference between the Kaplan test and the AAMC test, aside from who writes the questions, is that the AAMC tests are kind of just like thrown together. The Kaplan tests, we make sure to spread it out so that like you won't get 3 passages all on the kidney on the same practice test, because you want to see a bunch of topics on the practice tests so that you can expose as many weaknesses as possible so you know what it is that you want to work on. The AAMC doesn't really care about that, so you could get 3 kidney passages on an AAMC practice test. But we kind of made sure not to do that and spread it out a little bit more, because what we want to do with the practice tests is identify what your weaker areas are, because you don't know to go after that weaker area if you don't know that it is a weaker area. So you want to be getting questions wrong and allowing that to point you towards what you need to do in order to not get those questions wrong anymore. And when you review a question that you got wrong, there's always at least one thing that you can learn from that. There's always at least one lesson. Sometimes, I would say most of the time, there's at least 2 lessons that you can learn from a single MCAT question. Because every time you get a multiple choice question wrong, you're failing twice. You're failing to recognize that the right answer is right, but you're also failing to see that there's something wrong with the answer choice you're picking. There's something wrong with all 3 wrong answer choices on every MCAT question. Now, the reason why you didn't get it right might be the same as the reason why you got it wrong. If you just make a math mistake, you end up getting a number. That number is one of the answer choices. You're going to pick it. And the reason you pick it is the same reason that you didn't pick the right one, because you made a mistake and you got a prediction that was wrong. But sometimes the reason that you get it wrong is different from the reason why you didn't get it right. The reason why you picked the wrong answer choice might be a different reason than why you avoided the right one. So put some thinking into the reasons why you got that wrong and be honest. Don't just say, oh man, it was down to a 50-50 and I just guessed wrong. Well, even if you guessed right, there's things that you can learn from that. Be honest about why you didn't get the question right. What was so tempting about that wrong answer choice? And that's one of the ways that the MCAT has of getting smart people to get questions wrong, is they just make really tempting answer choices that aren't correct, but they're really on topic. Or they're worded in a way that's kind of hard to figure out that it's actually saying the opposite of what the right answer choice should say. There's a lot of different ways that they have of taking answer choices that could be right, changing them so that they're now a very tempting wrong answer choice. But when you go through every question that you get wrong, like I said, we have our students make a spreadsheet. When you take a practice test, you generate a whole lot of data.
No, he doesn't.
And oops, sounds like somebody may
He-
not be muted. All right, thank you. All right, so when you generate a lot of data, that data is only good if you organize it and you analyze it and you learn from it. So when you take a practice test, you should be writing down information on every question that you get wrong, including why you got it wrong, why you didn't get it right, and sorry about that, what you're going to do to fix it. So there's why I missed it and how I'll fix it. Coming up with that treatment plan in that how I'll fix it column is how you're going to be able to increase your score over time. Coming up with the right plans to address the actual underlying issues that are leading you to getting those questions wrong. And again, I'm not here to try to sell you on a course, just to give you a couple of different options and set you on a path, whether that path includes studying with Kaplan or not. Just want to make sure that everybody's keeping the right study principles in mind. For those of you who are considering a Kaplan course, we do have some options that have a guaranteed 15-point increase. Now, all of our courses, or not every one of our courses has that guarantee that there are certain things that you need to fulfill. But all of our courses do include that personalized study plan with the calendar that we talked about before, a whole lot of practice, everything that AAMC releases. So if you are going to study with Kaplan or even just considering it, don't pay any money to get anything from the AAMC. Because if you do enroll with Kaplan, you'll have access to everything that AAMC has ever published. So of course, if you aren't studying with Kaplan, you definitely should be considering getting all of the AAMC's materials, which you would have to pay them for. But all Kaplan students have that as uh, part of their online package. So, like I said, we have a number of different options for uh, improving, a couple different options for preparing, where we've got those courses. The courses can be in person, the courses can be live online. We also have tutors, so you can work one-on-one. That's something that I do pretty extensively. I spend most of my time either teaching the class or working one-on-one with students. We also have a premium tutoring option where you can be guaranteed to be matched with somebody like myself or somebody like Ari who have demonstrated expertise by scoring a 520 or higher. Uh, so all of our online teachers have scored a 520 or higher, and many of our tutors have as well. With the premium tutoring package, you would be guaranteed to work with one of the tutors who has scored over a 520. We also have the live online courses. We have the self-paced courses, which aren't live. They're all just recordings. So if that fits your schedule better, you can just do things on your own time. We've got admissions consulting as well, where if you want to sit down with somebody and work on personal statements or make sure that you're putting yourself in the best light for your application possible, that is an option for you. We also have the boot camp, which we're just gearing up for in the summer, where it's basically all day, eat, sleep, breathe MCAT for a couple of weeks. So basically 5 weeks of just MCAT all day, every day, with days off, of course, for breaks. But it's sort of a more comprehensive, intense option, usually chosen by people who either need to see huge increases in their score or really want to guarantee that that they can have the best opportunity to score, to get one of those elite kind of scores themselves. But a lot of different options. If you have questions on any of this stuff, of course, please let me know. But we do have a couple of options that are coming up. It looks like here in your area, one that runs from May 30th to June 30th. So that would be a 3 times a week class. Probably it looks like 6:30 on Sundays and 9:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The June 11th through July 30th is a little bit of a longer timeline because it's only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That one's during the day. There are, of course, a lot of live online class schedules, and personally, I always recommend that people go with live online because it's very convenient. You don't have to spend any of your time traveling to get to class or anything, but some people do like to have that sort of extra layer of accountability with a real in-person classroom and in-person teacher. That's why you have so many different options so that, no matter what your situation is, we can find something that will work for you. Now here we've got Jillian's information again, where you can talk about your own study plan. So please get that information down if you'd like to talk with her. But at this point, I'll just open it up to any questions that any of you have. You can come on microphone, you can type it in the chat, whatever. Just let me know what questions you have, what I can help with, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. What questions do we have? Don't all jump at once. All right, question about the resources. When you enroll in a Kaplan course, there's an expiration date. That expiration date is not the last day of classes. So the different options that we have a 3-month option, a 6-month option, a 9-month option, so on. You'd have access the entire time until that expiration date. There are usually opportunities of playing around with that expiration date to make sure that you are that you have access leading up to your test date. But generally, you'll have access as long as you need it. What other questions? And you don't have to direct message the question to me. You could just put it in the chat, but you can use the direct. I just if you're talking to everybody in the chat, it just the conversation makes more sense for everybody else. But I'll answer questions either direct or public. How much are the courses? That's an important consideration as well. Well, we saw before, and I will bring this up again. There we've got a code for 15% off. The different courses are different amounts of money. The boot camp is going to be your most expensive option. The self-paced would be the least expensive option. But of course, with the discounts and everything else, we don't have prices on here because the prices are on the site, and we run different promotions and everything all the time. So while I don't have exact pricing information, you can definitely find that stuff. And remember, it would only be whatever that number is times 0.85 because it's 15% off. When studying for the MCAT, what is the best time to study? The time that you have. Time that you're not doing other things, which is why everybody's going to be on a slightly different timeline. But we recommend at least a couple of months before your test and at least a couple days a week where you're seriously engaging with your MCAT materials. Resources for students that are limited income. Reach out to somebody at Kaplan. You can talk. You can use the chat on the site. Like if you just go to kaplan.com/MCAT, there's going to be a little yellow chat box in the corner. Use that to talk to somebody who can work with you on like certain promotions that we might be running, or sometimes we do have things like financial aid, or at least being able to break up payments and spread out payments over a long time instead of paying all at once. Those are the people who deal with things like that. I don't even know the prices and stuff because, again, I'm not a salesman. I'm a teacher. So we didn't send somebody here trying to push the course on you. We just sent somebody to let you know what your options are and give you some framework for building your own study plan if you don't end up choosing to enroll with Kaplan. Looks like you, yes.
Sorry, if you don't mind, I just wanted to inform that just the JUMP members that may be online, JUMP provides a free MCAT, 5-week MCAT test prep, and students who enroll, they get access to the Kaplan, the book sets. You can rent it for free. You also get access to the Kaplan Q Bank and practice tests, etc. Okay, so those are students who are members of JUMP. You do have access to that. For those who are not members, feel free to reach out or take the picture on the screen.
All right, thank you. So I'll say one thing about those books. Don't read the books. Use the books. Don't read them. A lot of people have this idea that they'll just read through all the books and then they'll start their practice. But the books, I like to consider them to be like a dictionary. Nobody's getting fluent in a new language by reading a translation dictionary, but it is a very useful resource when you need to look up something specific. So reading the book is not going to get you fluent in the MCAT, but when you get a question wrong because you don't know some science content, use the index in that book to go back and find that page, that paragraph, that figure, not that whole chapter. So we're not reading the books cover to cover. Any other questions?
I've been getting some questions. These are generally from JUMP members, and they want to have a better idea of when they will be able to register for the summer test prep. You will receive an email in a few weeks regarding that. The actual course begins the last week of May. Okay, so you will have plenty of time to register for that course and get access to the Kaplan books before the course begins.
Any other questions?
Also, there is in the chat a giveaway, which is so awesome. I think it's Yuri. My apologies if I said that incorrectly. But you can get a giveaway for a free Kaplan study guide, which I think is super awesome.
I'm not seeing any more questions come through, but you know what? I'm gonna stick. No, so of course, obviously, you've got Billion's information there for reaching out. I'll just put my information in as well, just in case anybody wants to reach out about anything we talked about today, or really anything related to the MCAT or med schools or whatever. You can reach out to me directly. You can reach out to Jillian. One thing that you'll find with Kaplan is that we have a lot of resources for getting questions answered. A lot of people who can either answer your questions or find somebody who can answer your questions. There's the chat feature on the site. You've got your contact information for Jillian. You can talk to me. You could just call up 1-800-CAP test and talk to somebody. There's a lot of different ways that you can get help, get your questions answered, and get some guidance as to how to prep for the MCAT. And we tend not to be very pushy and trying to sell you stuff, because we know that people are going to prep for the MCAT in different ways. We want everybody to prepare well, and of course, we want some of you to uh, join us in a Kaplan course, because for some of you, it would be the best way to prep. For people who are going to choose to prep differently, we've got advice for you as well. So you can send me an email if you've got any questions. You can talk to Jillian. We've all got all the same information, and we're interested in helping you get what you need in order to do well on this test. So because I don't see any more questions, I'm going to hop off camera now. You can send me an email, and I hope to see some of you. If you enroll in a Kaplan course, one very underutilized resource is the workshops. I work on the workshops a couple of times a week usually, and if you do enroll in a Kaplan course, make sure to check out those workshops. They're a very valuable additional resource, especially for those of you who are looking for extra content. The classroom component of the course itself is 42 hours long. We have another 100 or so hours of content just on the workshops, which are hour-long sessions specifically dedicated to just one topic.
That's awesome. And for those who may not be able to see the chat, his email is Patrick, Patrick, .McCall, MCCALL, @kaplan.com. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.